This is Jeremy Blankenship, and this is my proposal to remove TCE in Liberty, Missouri. So, Liberty, Missouri is a suburb of Kansas City with contamination of soil and groundwater in the areas around a former chemical plant in their industrial park area. The site was designated a Superfund site by the EPA. The primary contaminant of note is TCE, or trichloroethylene. TCE was created back in the late 1800s as a medical replacement for chloroform, which came into use when it became cheaper to make in and around the 1920s, when oil started becoming more prevalent as a main source of energy, because the oil allowed it to be made a lot cheaper than it was when it was originally created. It was used as an inhaled anesthetic and most often given to women in childbirth, usually in home births or in births in the hospital, as a way to get through early contraction pains, because it smelled better than chloroform. Obviously later, once they learned of more of the harmful side effects to TCE, this stopped becoming common use. However, it remained useful as an industrial solvent, even to this day, in several different industries, including weapons manufacturing. It's an important element of microchip manufacturing, as well as using TCE to clean out machinery and devices which have had fuels in them. NASA uses that as an example to clean out any parts of their rockets or previously their space shuttles that would have fuel going through them that they were going to use again. They would flush with TCE in order to get any of those former fuel agents out of the system. How you make TCE is by taking standard ethylene and halogenating it with chlorine. So you're taking the hydrogen out and some of the hydrogen out and replacing it with chlorine. You do this by taking ethylene, which is a very common chemical, especially in industrial uses, and you basically put it in a bath of chlorine, liquid chlorine, and then heat that together. And as the temperature increases, the hydrogen will essentially come out of it, and the chlorine will replace those bonds, and thus you're left with 3 chlorine atoms on the molecule as opposed to the hydrogen that was there before, creating trichloroethylene. The chemical properties of TCE is that it's a chlorinated hydrocarbon. It is relatively insoluble, so it's very low solubility, which means when it gets into the groundwater, it sinks and creates DNAPLs, or DNAPLs, which are dense non-aqueous phase liquids, which means they don't mix in with the water. They make little pockets of themselves inside groundwater, as it all kind of forms together, which leads to its high rates of contamination. It's already oxidized, so most aerobic forms of remediation are either inefficient or ineffective. Known toxic effects of trichloroethylene is that it is a known carcinogen with damage reported to livers, kidneys, lungs, also known to cause heart arrhythmias, as well as neural damage. And it is also dangerous because it can be exposed to humans in multiple different ways. It can be inhaled. It can be consumed via contaminated groundwater, and even just making physical contact with TCE is also dangerous. So the location of the contamination is in the lands surrounding the industrial complex where this chemical plant was. And it has, as you can kind of see in the picture there, which is an actual picture of that industrial part of that industrial park, is it has a mix of open land and trees, obviously along with the industrial buildings and such, a few little pools of water, but because it is still a working industrial park and it is so close, there's actually a highway right there, the desire for a in situ remediation, which means on site instead of taking all the soil and trucking it all somewhere and pumping all of the groundwater out and sending it to a location somewhere else to be treated and brought back, is not as desirable, just for the sheer aesthetics of it as well as the cost savings. So more of an in situ remediation would be preferable. The soils in the area are mollisols with the subtype Udall, which means they have a dark surface horizon because of the buildup of organic materials from grass and trees with roots that tend to be more on the surface. The historical plant domination was by prairie grasses, and because it doesn't have a lot of darkness all the way down through the soil, it drains really easily down into the groundwater. So water going into the soil will get through that top layer and will go right down into the groundwater. This means any contaminants that come along, like TCE, will go along for the ride right down into the groundwater. So TCE contamination will be happening both in the soil itself when it kind of gets caught in certain particles, but also will be there's TCE in the groundwater in the area as well. So the characteristics that we need in order to help remediate this TCE is we need a natural microbiologic species, or we need to use the natural microbiologic species that exist that do break down TCE. We have to give them a suitable environment. Studies have shown that those microorganisms perform better in a rhizosphere, which is the area around the roots of plants. So we need a plant that grows in the region that can create a suitable rhizosphere, and preferably as large a rhizosphere as possible, that can also hopefully tap into and help clean up those groundwater sources. A secondary goal of, again, going back to earlier discussion, is something on site that looks aesthetically pleasing and would generally not be noticed by the public. If you didn't know that there was some kind of remediation going on there, you could just say, oh, those are nice. So the species selected for my proposal would be the Plains cottonwood tree. The Plains cottonwood is a subspecies of the eastern cottonwood, with the only major difference being the shorter leaves that it has. Tends to have shorter leaves, which, again, it's not a full separate species, mainly because they're so similar, and the reason why it has these shorter leaves may be completely based on environment rather than it actually evolving different traits. The cottonwood trees are members of the poplar family, which is a popular branch of plant for phytoremediation. They are fast growing, so they're going to reach maturity within the first 20 years. They, as you can see in the picture, can grow quite large, meaning they're going to have a lot of roots, which means a lot of area taken up by even just single plants. So you don't need lots and lots and lots of trees over an acre. Spaced out, a few cottonwoods will take care of a relatively large area. They can create a natural windbreak. The leaves it's said that the sound when you can see there's lots of space and gaps in the leaves there, which help it on. So western Missouri being right near the Great Plains, you experience a lot of high wind events. The gaps in the tree allow it to survive those events with maybe losing a branch here or there, rather than losing the whole tree. You can see the trunk is very sturdy and large around, which also helps it survive those high wind events. And then the root system of the cottonwood tree grows and seeks out water and then taps it. So, how the cottonwood specifically helps remediate. So, the water-seeking roots will tap into the groundwater, and it will do that year-round because a cottonwood tree is a phreatophyte, which is a plant that needs to be constantly exposed to water. So the roots will tap down into the groundwater at all times, which means it will be drawing up large amounts of water, because if you saw how large that tree was, those large adult trees can take up to well over 100 gallons of water each day during the growing season, which is going all the way from March all the way into November in northern, northeast, or northwestern Missouri. Also, the rhizosphere, the large root system of a cottonwood tree, creates an anaerobic condition, which is best suited for the breakdown of TCE, as stated earlier, because remember, TCE has already been oxidized, so the exposure to oxygen doesn't help break it down at all. So anaerobic conditions for those microorganisms break down TCE faster than other types. And then the tree itself is actually also able to uptake and mineralize TCE into its cells. So, phytoremediation is considerably cheaper than other methods because outside of the groundwater and the soil testing, your major cost really is just the tree and planting the tree. And after that, there isn't a lot of ongoing. The ongoing cost is simply, the periodic testing of the groundwater to view the progress being made. And those tests are much cheaper, and the trees, and that whole process is much cheaper than, again, something like pumping water out or pumping oxygen into the groundwater to try and oxidize or get rid of the TCE, or some kind of taking the soil away. Also, planting trees is publicly appealing to constituents. People are always generally pro-tree, especially in industrial areas, which can look, very plain with lots of cement and smokestacks. Having a couple of nice big tall cottonwood trees in an area, or few or a dozen big tall cottonwoods, definitely enhance the viewability of the area. The one major drawback to using cottonwood trees is growth speed. Even though they are a fast-growing tree species, a fast-growing tree means it's growing up to 6 feet a year in premium conditions, which means it will take 25, 30 years for this issue to be resolved, if not a little bit longer. You'll see some progress right away, but it is a long-term process. To counteract that a little bit, once the TCE is seen as relatively cleaned up, the trees can stay unless that land is again needed for something in the industrial park. So conclusions are that TCE is a harmful chemical that needs to be removed. It can't just be left to sit there because it can accumulate over time, even if it's just small contaminations here and there. You really need to be working in a proactive way of trying to take care of that. There are ways to clean up the contaminant without destroying the landscape and are efficient use of taxpayer dollars. These are some of the studies I referenced, and thank you very much.